My name's Mark LaSala, and I'm a real client of Ed Bernstein's. I was driving on the freeway, the truck cut me off, dropped this whole drive shaft. I had a piece fly through my windshield, went across my body, and across my face. I found Ed's office through word of mouth. They just said he's the best of the best. They put you at ease. They show you compassion. They have your back.
I'm Ed Bernstein. You've heard a lot of promises made by lawyers on TV, but if you really want dignity, respect, and trust, call me. The call is free.
The Ed Bernstein Show. Now, here's Ed.
Hi, and welcome to our show. Well, with me today is my favorite Congresswoman, Dina Titus.
Thank you.
And, you know, I was just thinking about you and your family's background in education is just phenomenal. You know, you were involved in that world and taught at the university for a long time.
Yeah.
Your husband, Tom, also is a professor, author. His father, Wright Hall
That's right.
at UNLV, is named after your husband, Tom's dad, right?
That's right, John Wright.
John Wright. And your sister also is really involved in Nevada State College?
Yeah, she was a founding faculty member at Nevada State College and taught teachers of special ed.
Is that something you grew up around with your family?
You know, they weren't involved in education directly, but it was always assumed you'd go to college. You know,
Right.
that was just part of the scene, and there was a value to education. I had an aunt who was in education, but neither of my parents were. But it was just something that we knew was important for our own futures, our family's future, and it's a commitment.
And as you look back upon your own education, all the years you spent in the industry, and you look at, you know, some of the things that are going on now.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't seem like there's a bright future for the way we educate in this country now.
You know, you're right. I went to William and Mary, and my parents thought that was a good place for a Southern belle. You wouldn't get in trouble there. Unfortunately, or fortunately, it was close to Washington, so I learned politics not just in the classroom where Thomas Jefferson sat, but kind of in the streets in Washington at the time in the late 60s. But, you know, over time, I think the emphasis has gone away from kind of the classics to. I met with the president of William and Mary not too long ago, and she said their emphasis is analytics. I'm not even sure what analytics are, and they've become very top-heavy in administration. Also, I don't think I could teach political science today like I did before, because people. They just don't believe facts. You know, they believe what they see on Fox. I could say that paper is white, and somebody'd say, "Oh, that's just your opinion." Well, no, there's a difference between opinion and fact. And then at another level, look at all what's happening with school boards and taking books out of libraries and saying you can't teach certain subjects. It is a real change from the time I was both a student and a faculty member.
Yeah, you know, it's at some point, I mean, you're in the educational system. One is in the educational system. So you assume, I would think, that somebody's intelligent enough, give them enough books, let them discern what is appropriate or not appropriate for them to read or not read. And even if it's something may not be appropriate, I mean, having the knowledge and background at least to understand and identify that information is important.
Well, that's right. Critical thinking on your part is part of education. May not be something you always agree with, but you need to understand what it is so you can form your own opinions and make your own good arguments.
I know that, look, you are very well versed in a lot of areas, and we're talking about education, but I want to kind of shift away, because I know you work on a subcommittee on infrastructure and what is it? Transportation infrastructure. And I'm looking at, you know, all the video of what's going on in Florida this week with the hurricane, and in Georgia. And and then we kind of had a scare in Las Vegas
Yeah.
last week. We had
right.
potentially a hurricane coming through here. I just came back early in the summer. My wife and I were in Europe, and I came back from that trip thinking that it seems that Europe has surpassed the United States in their quality of infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the United States has been asleep at the wheel for the
right.
last 20 or 30 years with bridges and roads and highways compared to what's going on in Europe. And now you see what's going on in some, with climate change, and what it's doing to some of our roads and highways and bridges. And then to make matters worse, I was in San Diego a couple weeks ago and made the mistake of driving back.
Oh, yeah.
And it took me an extra 2 hours in traffic. I know that you have done some incredible work and have gotten some wonderful projects, but I guess they take time, right?
That's right. Well, the one that, excuse me, eludes us is that speed train to Southern California. And that's getting closer than it ever has before, but that would take cars off that highway, be more convenient for people, be faster, good for business, but also be good for the environment because transportation is the biggest source of air pollution out there. And so, yeah, that would be a great thing to do. But talk about the climate change and the disasters. Because of climate change that many people won't even recognize, disasters occur more often, they last longer, they're stronger, and they're more expensive. And if we don't build back better, as they say, and be more resilient, it'll just keep happening over and over again. You saw the pictures of the roads up there at Mount Charleston following the recent
Right, yeah.
floods as an example here. Part of the infrastructure committee that I oversee, subcommittee, has to do with FEMA. And we need to fund FEMA. But it's interesting, a lot of those Republican members vote against funding FEMA, but if they have a disaster in their state, they're the first ones to cry out for help to recover. And we always do it because, we care about the whole country and recovery. But it's a little hypocritical on their part.
And I've noticed that over the last several years, and it seems like if it's something is in a red or a blue area, it depends on how quickly you're going to get federal funds. And I remember when Trump was president, he was very slow in some of the blue areas to allocate federal funds. I remember Puerto Rico especially.
Oh, yeah. Throwing out the paper towels.
Right. But it seems like a lot of these disasters are on the coast, which typically are blue.
Well, that's right. But now, Florida, the president's already said that that'll be a disaster area and FEMA money will go there. And you know what's happening in Florida with the governor there.
Yeah, it seems like Biden has been less political than
right.
Trump has been in that. Mm-hmm. But the point I was trying to reach is, within the last year, we got a lot of money for infrastructure,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And a lot of good work that you did, but we just don't see it yet.
Yeah. Some places they're putting up signs saying, thanks to the federal government, IRA money or infrastructure money, this is a new bridge or this is a new road. You're right, it's shovels in the ground are a long way from the finished project. Look around this valley, how many cones you see. And people get real irritated by the traffic congestion and the cones, but that's really a sign of progress because that's going to be a new road or a new interchange or bridge or something. We're trying to get I-11 done from here to Phoenix so we can have a interstate there. We're the only two cities in the country that aren't connected by an interstate, major cities. So, yeah, people do get impatient. And, Democrats voted for the infrastructure bill. Just a handful of Republicans did. And the Inflation Reduction Act, which has also got a lot of money for the state Senate. But we haven't done a good enough job explaining all of that to the public to say, look what has helped us to recover from COVID.
I agree. So let's talk about it now.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
What do we have to look forward to in Nevada, for instance, with some of the infrastructure money?
Well, $4 billion has come, and the number of bridges will be fixed. Roads will be repaired. You look at the interchange at Tropicana and I-15. Right. That's something. We haven't gotten the funding for I-11 all the way, but they have done some expansion of the road from here to Boulder City and also some environmental studies. But that infrastructure is not just streets and bridges, it's also water projects that will make the water system more efficient, safe streets projects here in the heart of the valley, which is my district, more bicycle lanes, more electric buses, better ADA compliance along sidewalks, so it's a safe street for all the users. Mass transit is covered in that bill. So, I mean, it's soup to nuts, really, with the funding that's coming. Now, some of it goes through the local government, RTC, some of it goes through NDOT at the state level, but there's a lot of federal money in there for them to dole out.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the I-11, because I was just last weekend. I was drove down to Phoenix, and I was surprised. 'Cause I hadn't driven down there in a long time. Mm-hmm. You know, you would think that there's a highway that goes from Las Vegas to Phoenix. I know, but there's not. And I know at times it becomes one lane in each direction, which is very dangerous. That's right. You have to try to pass, and there's oncoming traffic is coming your direction. Oh, correct. So, I mean, that would be a major feather in Las Vegas's cap to, get that highway done between Las Vegas and Phoenix and have that resource of people coming in that way and help, increase the number of amount of traffic, tourism from Arizona.
I think so too, and it would help with. We talked about the trucks. We got to bring a lot of stuff in here besides people, and so that would be good for business at both ends. I chair the I-11 caucus, which is made up of Nevadans and people from Arizona, and it's bipartisan. Arizona's been a little slower at their environmental studies than we have, but there's a lot of support for it. And I've talked to Secretary Buttigieg about this. I said, this is a bi-state, bipartisan, a good investment. Let's put some of the dollars there. So we're pushing for it. And eventually it'll probably become from Mexico, Tucson, Phoenix, Las Vegas. But let's get that here to Phoenix first.
Yeah. Do you work closely with him, Secretary of Transportation?
I do. I like him. He's been to Nevada several times. We've done some events together. He always takes my call. I try not to harass him too much, but I have talked to him about the speed train and about I-11.
Yeah, is he on board with the bullet train?
Well, he appreciates the arguments. He hasn't made a commitment. But on the speed train, there's some money in a pot for a speed train. And what I have said is, don't just do little dibs and dabs here. Put a big investment in one project. Show it can be successful, and that would be this project. Anytime there's railroad money, it tends to go to the Northeast because they got so many commuters. But we need some in the Southwest too.
Yeah, because look, I just talked about my trip to Europe. But one of the most magnificent things is being able to take a train from Milan to anywhere in Italy. And they're going 160 miles an hour or something. I mean, they're quick.
And it puts you right in the heart of town when you get off. You don't have to worry about finding the station, finding a bus, renting a car.
Yeah. Changing the topic again. I wanted to chat with you about. It seems like everybody's making a big deal this election cycle about age. Senator Feinstein, is getting criticized a lot. Her involvement, or maybe lack of involvement, in D.C. right now. They talk about Joe Biden's age. Ironically enough, I really don't hear it mentioned that much about Trump, and he's basically the same age as Biden, with 2-year difference between the two.
Yeah, and Biden's in much better shape than Donald Trump is.
Certainly looks like he is. I don't see Trump riding a bicycle at all.
No.
But, should that be a factor? Should there be an age limit? I remember Senator Byrd, was 60 years in the Senate at one time.
Well, you want people to be at the top of their game when they're making tough decisions. But age is not the only factor. There are some people who are young who I wouldn't want making decisions for me.
That's a great point.
Knowledge and experience really can make a difference. You're going to see a lot of pictures of the president stumbling or catching with his eyes closed or something from the other side. But the reason I think they're doing that is because they got no other arguments. They have no policy. You can't attack our president's policy because we have recovered. We've done a lot of things, and so they just come up with anything they can, so it gets real personal. But yeah, I don't want to see Donald Trump at the beach. It's not something I want to see.
Well, you bring up a point that that the presidential race has now and in the past become about personalities, basically.
That's right.
It used to be about policy. It used to be that there were defined policies that the Democrats had, that the Republicans had, and you were aligned or not aligned with some of those policies. Doesn't appear that way anymore in the presidential race. Is it that way in your congressional race?
Well, the congressional races are so tied to the national issues, it's becoming more and more like that. You've seen the ads, they're just all negative. They use a bad picture of you. They can take a good picture and make it look bad. But a lot of it is that personality, and it's unfortunate because, as you say, used to be about issues. You could debate the issues. Look now what debates turn out to be. And then after the election, you kind of came together to work out some compromises. There's no coming together after the election now. How can you work with somebody who said all these horrible things about you that aren't true in a campaign? It's much more difficult. And so you go after the election and kind of lines are drawn and you see the result. Right now in Congress, when we go back after Labor Day, all they want to do is investigate Hunter Biden, investigate the president, investigate Mayorkas, investigate the attorney general. That's not moving the country forward. That's not making progress on any policies. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't just shut down government because that's their attitude.
You were elected to Congress, 2008? And over the last 4 years particularly, how much of your time has really been devoted in Congress in dealing with these investigations and impeachment issues?
Well, this term that's all it's been. Nothing has moved forward. We impeached Donald Trump twice, remember? But that was some hard facts. You saw the January 6th Commission. Meantime, we've been trying to work on. We had the infrastructure bill. We had the CHIPS bill for manufacturing. We have made some policy progress up until this year, and now that's really all they very much care about. What I've done on the infrastructure committee, you would think that roads and bridges wouldn't be partisan.
Why should it be?
Right, everybody needs them, and it's non-ideological. But even that has become more so in the time I've been there. But you pick your battles, and you find somebody who'll work with you. It's an interesting thing. There's a congressman from Florida who's a veteran. He's a real gung-ho Trumper, real conservative, but he's against animal testing on kittens and little beagle puppies, which I am also very much against. So we can collaborate, co-sponsor, write letters together, and work on that one issue and just not deal with the rest of it. So if you can find somebody for something like that, that's a blessing.
So when you go back next week or so to D.C., what is it that you really hope to work on?
Well, FAA reauthorization is important. We've gotten it out of the House, and we're working on it out of the Senate and do maybe a conference call. But look at how important the airport is to our economy and to the whole country's economy. And also there's so much new technology in aviation. We need to keep up, because if we don't, just like you said earlier, Europe and the rest of the world is getting ahead of us in that area. So I think that'll be a big issue. But just funding the government and keeping the doors open will be at the top of the agenda.
And it seems like that every year that's the same issue.
It is.
And it's everybody gets nervous. Stock market goes down.
Yep.
Then a couple days before the deadline, things get resolved, and
You're right.
It's tiresome.
It is, and that's exactly the playbook. We'll go back. We won't get it funded. They'll do a continuing resolution to December 15th. That'll go to the 18th. That'll go to the 22nd. the Christmas tree won't be decorated. They'll get it done, kick the can down the road. It's a terrible way to do business, and you can't plan, if you don't know how much money is going to be there. So policies kind of hang in limbo. And you're right, it doesn't help the economy because the stock market doesn't know what's going on and people get nervous.
Is there a way out of this? Do you see anything, any light at the end of the tunnel? I mean, people sooner or later are going to say, okay, enough of this. This is not working for me. It's not working for the country. It's not working for anybody. Let's just change, I guess the manner of how we're, conducting ourselves.
It's difficult to change those institutions. Now, when Biden was elected, he was a bipartisan guy. He wanted to reach across the aisle, and people had some optimism that he knew how the system worked because he'd been in Congress a long time himself. It started out a little bit that way, but, you put your hand out and somebody chops it off, you kind of get tired of doing that. So both sides kind of retrench.
And you alluded to this. It used to be that people would come together and have argue, passionately about their issue, and then at the end of the argument or discussion, be able to come together and compromise. And it used to be kind of like, hey, I'm not going to agree with you on this, but this is the position I got to take. But at the end of the day, we can still have lunch the next day.
That's right.
Right. Now, it's so hostile. The environment is so hostile that you can't even. That winking doesn't even go on anymore,
well,
right? There's no
true.
Pretending to even getting along.
Well, you remember Senator Howard Cannon. I worked for him as a faculty intern. He and Barry Goldwater were good buddies. I mean, they were friends. But in those days, you didn't come home every weekend to have to raise money. You took your families back to Washington. Children went to school. You played poker together. You played golf together. You went to church together. You kind of knew each other off campus. And that's not that way anymore. You go home because you got to raise money. You don't have social interaction. Here's an example. AIPAC used to take a bipartisan trip to Israel. Now they don't do that. They take Democrats on one trip and Republicans on one trip.
Because nobody can get along on the trip, right? With each other.
That's right.
Unbelievable. Over the years, I remember when you first were elected, nuclear energy was a big issue. The waste site, the dump site here, does that still present itself in D.C., about moving waste over to Nevada? Is that still an issue?
Well, this president hasn't funded it, and it's not in the budget. I watch it every day, though, because you never know when it might sneak back in there, because I hadn't figured out what to do with the waste. I support consent-based decision-making so that everybody's involved. But people here, I think, have had yucca fatigue. They don't think about it every day. If you ask them, what are your top 3 issues? I doubt many people would say Yucca Mountain, but I never let down the guard. And now you notice that they're moving towards smaller reactors and more kind of strategically placed. And I think we need to watch that, because while that sounds good for clean energy, what are you going to do with the waste? If we move down that path, then it may become an issue again.
Yeah. Hey, look, in addition to your expertise in education, you have a great background and familiarity with atomic power as well. Did you see the Oppenheimer movie?
I'm going to see it this week. In fact, I hadn't had a chance to.
I'd be curious what your thoughts were about.
People say it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you remember when that was? Well, you're too young.
No, but I came here in 1950 when Dad was stationed at Nellis, and that's when they were doing a lot of the shots. So he remembers seeing it. But certainly he was a part of the book I did, Bombs in the Backyard. But anytime somebody says, "Oh, name 3 people who living or dead you'd invite to a dinner party," Oppenheimer's always on my list.
Okay, so you're going to come back. You're going to try to keep the government open. You're going to deal with that, and then it becomes election season again, right? And that kind of like handcuffs everybody in D.C.
I know. The closer you get to the election, the harder it is to accomplish anything, and so then partisanship will really start in.
Yeah, and when you look at the state, because you also have a vast background in state in the state political world, having been the majority minority in the state Senate, right? Because now we're a majority. Now the Democrats are a majority.
That's
At the time you were the leader, you were a
Yes, sir.
minority, but
For 20 years.
for a long time. Were you a minority leader the whole time?
Jack Vergils was when I was first elected, but then I came right after that, so it was for about 15 years.
Right. I mean, but the whole 20 years, I mean, you were always in the minority?
One term out of that 20 years.
So you learned how to work with the
that's right.
majority
That's right.
significantly at that time.
And people will disagree with some of the things I did, but I don't think anybody will tell you that I wasn't effective. And so you're right. I'd like to think that did give me an experience to know how to pick your battles and work around not having the numbers, but get things done.
And in this term, you're in a minority. Last term, you were a majority. What do you see as the big difference? Or was there, since the margins are so narrow, is there not really that big a difference?
Well, I don't get to chair that subcommittee, so I don't get to set the agenda. That's one difference. But the Republicans are in the majority, excuse me, but they have that faction, that Freedom Caucus that is so, contrary, that they give the majority leader, McCarthy, as much trouble as they do our side. So they're often peeling off. And, he had to go through 15 rounds of votes before he was ever elected majority leader. And often they pull votes from the agenda because that group says they're not going to support it. And the Democrats aren't supporting it. So they just move on to something else. So they're not effective at all, even though they are in the majority.
Right. So would he be better off without those 15, Congress people? Would he govern differently?
I think he would. I mean, he was always kind of a moderate, kind of nondescript guy, but they have certainly pulled him to the right. He had made some statements about Trump early on, and now he's all in with the MAGA crowd, and he was going to restrain from impeaching Biden because he knew that there was no evidence and that wasn't popular. Now he says we may take it up as soon as we get back by the end of September. So they definitely control him.
And in your opinion, we've got about 30 seconds left, the number one issue in this campaign in Southern Nevada will be?
It'll be the economy. Because even though we've recovered, we got to be sure it's sustainable, and we got to be sure it reaches everybody, and that's my goal.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Congresswoman Dina Titus.
Thank
Good
you,
luck.
Ed.
My name's Mark LaSala, and I'm a real client of Ed Bernstein's. I was driving on the freeway, the truck cut me off, dropped this whole drive shaft, had a piece fly through my windshield, went across my body and across my face. I found Ed's office through word of mouth. They just said he's the best of the best. They put you at ease. They show you compassion. They have your back.
I'm Ed Bernstein. You've heard a lot of promises made by lawyers on TV, but if you really want dignity, respect, and trust, call me. The call is free.